Well, is everyone in and settled? Have we got everybody gathered? Fantastic. Well, look, hello, everyone. Thank you all for being here today for what is, and what can only be described really, as such a deserving event. I'm Karen Patterson. I'm the daughter of a dairy farmer. And since I was a little girl, I've visited the Balmoral show and later reported, indeed, on the Balmoral show. Here at Balmoral Park, the show publicly celebrates the very best of Northern Ireland's most colourful and, dare I say, most hard-working industry. But privately, the farming community has its own struggles. Farm accidents, suicide and bereavement, for whatever reason, continue to take their toll. And it's in recognition of the impact of these deaths that Rural Support and Embrace Farm have partnered to deliver a new programme of service for bereaved farming families in Northern Ireland, and also for those who have survived a farm accident. Not one, but two government ministers are with us today, demonstrating the importance of this initiative. Both the Agriculture Minister, Edwin Poots, and the Health Minister, Robin Swan, have taken time out of their very busy schedules to be with us today to officially launch Life Beyond. We're going to hear from them shortly. Just a couple of housekeeping notes then before we get things underway. Please remember, do wear your face masks whenever you're moving around the environment. But because the chairs have been placed about a metre apart, you're more than welcome to remove them if you feel comfortable to do so while you're seated. There are hand sanitising stations around the hall and outside areas. And if you could please remember to turn off your mobile phones. There are loads of people here on hand to give you any assistance if you need it today. So let me introduce you now to someone who has been instrumental in the development of the Life Beyond programme. Please give a very warm welcome to the President of the Ulster Farmers Union, Victor Chestnut.
Ministers Edwin Poots and Minister Robin Swan, we want to give you a very warm welcome here today. Minister Gordon Lyons has sent his apologies, and we are pleased that Robert Kidd is representing his department. Distinguished guests, I really want to thank you for your attendance here today. It means a lot to both myself and those of us who have seen the need for this launch of this initiative. We're here today to launch the Life Beyond programme. It's been developed to support farmers and farming families who have suffered bereavement and loss for a variety of reasons, untimely death. Farms are different places. When I was involved almost 10 years ago in the first farming programme of the Rare Breed series, they hadn't a name. I must say, when they called it Rare Breed, I sort of raised my eyebrows and thought, well, if they'd have said that, I would have went on to it at the start. But we are a rare breed, and we have rare challenges. And when there's untimely death or accident on the farm, there's challenges that the rest of society doesn't have to put up with. That's why we saw the need for something different. I must welcome Brian and Norma from Embrace Farm. Brian, I got an invite down to your service, which you set up in the south, that remembrance service. It had a lasting effect on me. And indeed, the vision for this happened really after a lot of thought, but it really, first time I shared it was at a farm safety service in Dromore Cathedral. Harry Sinclair, and Harry's with us here today, and Norma and myself were chatting over a cup of tea. That was in the days before COVID. We gave each other our word that we would think about it and we would meet at Balmoral Show. Of course, Balmoral Show 2020 never happened, but the idea was strong enough to stand that. And I'm delighted today that we're here today and you are able to join us for the launch of this important service. Thank you.
Victor, by all means, take a seat. Thank you. And as Victor takes a seat there, I'd like to invite up onto the panel stage with me, Veronica Morris. You'll all be very familiar with Veronica, very hard-working lady, Chief Executive of the Rural Support, and Norma Rowan, that Victor just mentioned there. Norma, rather, is General Manager of Embrace Farm. So if you guys could come up and join us here on stage, and as they get comfortable, Victor, spell out for us why you're so passionate about the idea of life beyond. As President of the Ulster Farmers Union, you'll have met a lot of people from the farming community, often in their darkest hour, dare I say. Why did you want to push this programme through?
Yes, well, I make no apologies for being a farmer through and through, and a farmer at heart, and for having the love of the farmer. But when you see farmers hurting, whether that is having some incident on their farm where they're losing livestock to TB or something else, it's one thing. But when there's untimely death, it's something else. And it sounds very commercial, but I can't think of a better way of describing it. But I felt there was a gap in the market for something like what Embrace Farm delivered in the south. And I was determined to try to fill that gap for our farming community here in the north. Thankfully, our farming community have neighbours, and they do pull in at times of need. But there's a lot of sorting out that has to be done after that's not appropriate for somebody so close to the farm to do. So I feel this service will have a lot to offer. As we started to talk about it, we didn't want to replicate anything that are good services that happen in rural support. And when we contacted them, they were thinking about providing emotional support in cases of bereavement. So the whole thing dove together, and that's how Embrace Farm was born.
Well,
Embrace Farm, Life Beyond was born.
Life Beyond was born. Let's bring in Veronica. Veronica, you're CEO of Rural Support, very, very familiar with a lot of the problems that are being spoken about today. If you could summarise, what is it that's peculiar, if you like, to the farming industry when a bereavement happens? Bereavement happens to all of us, but why is the farming industry so acutely affected?
Well, Karen, within a farming family, when you lose someone, regardless of how that loss happens, whether it's through a sudden death or whether it's through an expected death, it affects the farm business, which affects the income that's coming into the farming family. So not only are you dealing with the trauma and the loss and the sadness of losing a loved one, you also then have to get up the next day or the same day and ensure that the animals are taken care of and that the farm business continues. And what that can do within a farming family is interrupt that time and space to deal with the emotional side of what has just happened. And if the person who has passed away, if it was through a sudden death, there may not be a plan in place for the family. There also may not be access to bank accounts, access to the business side. And that can cause a lot of distress for those that are left behind. And often what we see in rural support are people who are left behind who have no involvement with the farm business at all, or very little.
Is it quite common then that the man usually would be the farmer? He's out in the yard, mum's at the house. And I know in my family circumstance, it was mum put the dinner on the table, look after the children, and would never have been across the road to the yard. Someone like that is completely ill prepared for when someone passes away.
Absolutely. And if that happens in a sudden death, whether it's through an accident or from suicide, for example, the shock that brings with it, the trauma that brings with it for that person that's left behind, for that lady and her family. And she may have young children. We have worked with several cases where a lady is left behind with 4 or 5 small children, and there was no plan in place for what would happen if the head of holdings died. And so dealing with that, dealing with the process of grief, if it even is a process, is very challenging for farming families. And also too, as Victor has mentioned, people in rural communities are very helpful after a death. They will come in, but after a few weeks or after a few months, they do move on back to their own lives. And so, the isolation and loneliness that can come then, as well as all of the stress and pressure of trying to run a farm, can be overwhelming.
Yeah. Norma, sadly, you've had an experience of personal loss. Tell us a little bit about your story.
Yeah, 9 years ago, I was just home from hospital after having our first child when tragedy struck on our farm. as I'm sure in Northern Ireland as well, a community nurse will come and visit when you have a new baby in the house. And that's exactly what happened when the accident happened to Brian's dad.
What was the accident, if you don't mind explaining?
So a rake, raking up silage into swarts. So he was taking that apart. Brian's dad was a very exact man, and he liked things to be done correctly. And he felt one of the arms on the rake wasn't particularly straight, so he wanted to do a job of work on it. And Brian had said to him that morning, hang on till the afternoon, and we'll go look at it then. But no, he went to it then, and it fell apart and hit him in the head. He did walk from the accident, but he did go into shock afterwards, and rushed to hospital, placed on life support, and 3 days later, those machines were switched off. So as Veronica mentioned there's a herd of dairy cows at home, so when Brian was trying to ring his sisters to come to the hospital, he was also ringing neighbours to come and milk the cows, one just as important to the other, to a farmer. So we went through the motions of a funeral, and those rituals, neighbours, great help, the months ahead. And we've this big, huge corner window out of our kitchen, and I used to watch Brian coming in the evening times, and he just looked like somebody who had the weight of the world on his shoulders, and he had lost his dad, his mentor, his advisor, his confidant, a workman on the farm, very important. And one Sunday, we saw on national television about a remembrance service for the families of people who had died by suicide. We're like, why isn't there something like that for families, farm families, where people have died? Farmers are great workers. They are producing food for us all to eat every day. The legacy they leave behind is very important. And in fairness to our health and safety authorities, they do their job of work, but they issue a set of numbers at the end of the year. And behind each one of them numbers is a person, a dad, a husband, a granddad, a child, unfortunately. So we wanted to do something to honour them. So hence Embrace Farm was born.
What was the reaction whenever you took a very brave step, a very powerful step, to turn your own personal loss into a proactive, positive movement, essentially? Was the reaction from the community one of surprise or gratitude?
One of what can we do to help you in the ag community, really it was. Everywhere we turned, even to private businesses, happy to give us a couple of bob, to help us do what we need to do, but didn't want the recognition for it, they were just happy to help. So Embrace Farm was born, and we did that roll call of names. And the first year we did that in 2014, our church in County Leash was packed with people. To see grown men, mourn a loss that had happened 40 and 50 years ago. You could just see there was a story unraveling there with these people of trauma that had never been dealt with. Children who had been reared in an environment where something traumatic had happened, had changed dynamics in a family. And, I guess we saw that there was a need there. So we started to do some more things like bereavement weekends and counselling and things like that, just to try and acknowledge that trauma and help them work their way through it.
Yeah. Veronica, will people in Northern Ireland be able to come to you with historic cases?
Yes. So regardless of when the bereavement has happened, or regardless of what caused the bereavement, the Life Beyond programme will be there. And often we would see, just as Norma has said, people don't deal necessarily with the trauma of a loss when it happens. It can take 5, 6, 7, 8 years before they realise that what's wrong with them is actually the fact that they haven't dealt with the grief that they experienced through losing their loved one. And, mental health problems can be exacerbated or created because of that unresolved grief. So we work with those people as well,
So how will Life Beyond work on a practical basis? I know we're about to speak to two of they don't want me calling them experts in just a moment or two, but the practical realities of how you're going to lift people and try to help them pick up the pieces, how's that going to happen?
Okay, so the programme itself, you can self-refer in, so contacting us through the support line, you will be given contact within our farm support team led by Gillian Reid. We'll do an assessment with you, figure out what exactly the main issues are. Then the family will be appointed 2 mentors who are experts, much as they don't like us saying that. One of the mentors will be an expert in financial, technical, or business matters, and they can come in and help with any practical issues around the farm business. And the other mentor will be someone with a counselling background and bereavement support expertise, and where needed, trauma care support as well, expertise. So they will work with the family over a period of time. It could take 1 month, 2 months, 3 months initially.
Yeah, that's an important point.
Yes.
As we talked about, friends, family, community, they'll do their best, but life moves on very quickly. A lot of the issues we've talked about may not emerge for some months. Will you be there for the whole journey?
Yes.
Up to a year, maybe?
Yes, so our intention is it's very difficult to put a time frame on it, because our intention is to work with the families at their pace, so that may be quicker for some than others. But we estimate around a year we will be working with that family, as well as the one-to-one mentoring that's going to be provided. We will also provide peer-to-peer support groups when they are ready, and if they wish, where they can meet other people who have gone through similar experiences. And those will be perhaps for widows or widowers, siblings, young children, just to provide them with some support and an opportunity for them to give back, because that's something we hear always. When people come through an experience like this, they do want to help other people.
Yeah.
So that will also be part of it too.
Yeah.
And maybe just to say too that we will also work with people who have received a terminal diagnosis before they pass away, to allow that family to plan, to provide them with emotional support, and also to be there after they lose their loved ones, to try and avoid a lot of these issues, like access to bank accounts, like issues around the farm business side, to preempt those and plan ahead for those. And we'll be there to do that as well.
All right. Well, thank you all three very, very much indeed for setting out our stall today as to what the thinking is behind it and what the attempt is to try to address some of those concerns. I know we'll talk to you again in a wee while, Victor, but for now, Victor, Veronica and Norma, thank you both, both very, very much indeed. And I can invite our next guests on, who are our expert panellists. So if Sharon and Olivia, if you'd like to come and talk to us. Now, these are 2 very shy women, but once you get them warmed up, they're absolutely great. Come on up and talk to us, because Veronica has very carefully set out the stall in the sense of the practical help and the emotional support that Rural Support are going to be in a position to help offer alongside Embrace Farm and this new umbrella group, Life Beyond. So you're very, very welcome. Thank you for popping along to see us. So essentially what we're going to do over the next 10 minutes or so is tease out some of the practical realities of when tragedy strikes, essentially. So Sharon, if you're in the office and the phone rings, give me an example of some of the types of voices you've encountered.
Okay, thank you, Karen. When you get a phone call to visit a family who has been bereaved, be it sudden bereavement, suicide, or even a potential terminal illness, you have to be aware that that family has been hit with a tsunami of grief and emotion, and a second tsunami of financial and practical issues, which could have serious financial consequences. So you really don't know what you're heading into.
How quickly after an event might someone pick up the phone? Does it take a little bit of time before they think, what are my options? Or might they phone when they're at their most desperate and very raw?
That varies for each individual and each family and their support. I think, as Veronica had shared with you earlier, it could be a month, it could be years down the line. Grief, you can't account for how long grief is going to last, but sometimes that phone call is driven by the need to meet some practical issues. In other words, if you don't have money in the bank, if you don't have access to money, if there's cash flow issues, all sorts of practical issues, depending on the farm circumstances, that person, like your dad, could have been the main breadwinner. and the wife potentially left with, well, what do we do now? Do we have to sell the farm? Is there a will? If there's a will, is it straightforward? Is it current? Is it up to date?
What if there's not a will? We hear increasingly that people are not leaving wills. Have you a figure you can put on that? How many people within the farming community don't have a will?
When I started this a few years ago, just recently, the figure bandied about was 70% of farmers in Northern Ireland have not made a will.
Nearly 3/4.
Yes, and they don't even have an enduring power of attorney. And I think one of our guests after will explain the importance of that, of trying to do legal things and you not have that ability to do it. But 70%, approximately 70% of farmers in Northern Ireland have not made provision for their loved ones.
That's really shocking to me. So if you can break down for me, you've got vast experience, lots of different family circumstances. What are the key issues if you don't have a will?
Well, the key issue if you don't have a will and you've young children, you can't really do anything with that estate until they're of age, until they're 18 years of age. If you have, say, a herd number in the sole name, if you have a single farm payment, if you have a bank account, none of those can be touched until it goes to probate. And you could, as a result of not having a will, you could have family feuds and differences out there. Say a son who started working on the farm from an early age, with the anticipation this was going to be his career, his future, he was going to be the key successor, and maybe the other family went off and followed different careers. If that father, we assume it's a father, died intestate, 50% of the estate, this is after inheritance tax issues are dealt with, and that's another story, but 50% go to his spouse. The other 50% would be divided between his spouse and his children. So that young son, and I did have a situation, but thankfully we got there before anything happened. I explained that to the farmer, that really your son is anticipating that he's going to inherit the farm. In reality, he'll get only a fraction of the farm. So can you imagine the outcome of that situation had that actually happened? But it does happen.
How long might it take to get to probate? So you're a widow potentially, you maybe didn't have a joint bank account, you maybe don't know what to do with the herd number, and all the while bills are mounting. What can you do?
It could take years, huge problems. So for any farmer that's even listening to this, please think beyond. You don't know when the last day is, could be today. You know, what's going to happen to my family? Olivia and I go out and meet families that have not been prepared. I've met families that have had preparation and the difference is significant. You go out to someone, they know exactly what's going to happen to the estate. They've their joint accounts, their herd numbers, all prepared. They're dealing with emotional grief. But on top of that, if that person had not been prepared, they would have had that tsunami of practical and financial grief to grapple with as well. And the implications on the family are huge.
Let's bring Olivia in at this point. Olivia, I know you're terrific at dealing with people bereaved and young children as well.
That's right, yes.
Talk to me about what you do when you arrive at a home where some people find it easy to talk about what's happened. Others may feel, I don't want to share the burden, and maybe relish the idea that it's a stranger to talk to. Talk to us about some of the examples.
It depends on the individual, I suppose. You're going into somebody's home, so you have to be very mindful of that, be very respectful of where they're at, see them as where their needs are, ask them the questions, what could we do for you? You know, there will be, myself and Sharon have worked with a lot of cases where children are involved. There is complicated grief, there is trauma, there is depression, anxiety, isolation, chronic fatigue. There's so many levels of different, I suppose, avenues you can go to, but you take your cue from the family that you're going into.
If you walk in and you see a family clearly struggling at breaking point, what can you do?
Well, first of all, Sharon, usually the mentors go in first of all, so they do the practical assessment.
Yeah.
Then I come in and I do my assessment. So I'll give you an example. We went in initially for a farmer who mental health issues because of a trauma. Quickly, we identified the ripple effect of that trauma on the family members, and it was actually his adult daughter who had huge suicidal thoughts, depression, things like that. So you have to view the whole picture. You can't just go and say, right, this is the person I'm dealing with. It's the whole family. What's going on? What can we do in this immediate, in the present? Because this could be months down the line before we get to an end conclusion. We may not get to that end conclusion. So it's actually where they are and what we can do in that moment.
We're obviously working our way through a pandemic. We've been there 18 months and more now. What's been your experience of how farming families with that reinforced isolation, I think you might describe it? What are you hearing on the phone? What are you seeing on a day-to-day basis?
The social isolation is huge. The loneliness when they go out on the, it's a lonely place anyway on a farm, but when they come home, that's it. The door is closed. So trying to even engage some of Rural Support's other programs, like Over the Hedge, was huge in some of the, I suppose, collaborations that myself and Sharon were doing.
For people who don't know what Over the Hedge is.
Over the Hedge, for instance, we were with a farmer. We did a lot of grief counselling. Now, his grief was 10 years plus, and he felt guilt and shame to actually talk about it to his family members because they had their own things going on, and he had no support. So we had a loss of faith, a loss of identity, a loss of social inclusion. Became very reclusive himself. So we worked on the grief and all of those things, but we also brought in Over the Hedge, which was a phone call of a peer person. So somebody who knew they were talking about farms, that was somebody that he could relate to, somebody that he could actually build a friendship with. So we could bring him back out into social inclusion again.
And how is he now?
Brilliant. Yes, yeah. He made a friend, and that for him was huge because he'd lost all, in his perception, he'd lost all his friends.
Yeah. I think a lot of what we want to maybe achieve today is to say that even in the darkest times, there is help there. Perhaps there mightn't have been as much help in the past, but there will be help going on in the future. And it's about recognizing dark times and empowering people, giving them the strength to and the tools to pick up and continue on. So to that vein, Sharon, what would for you be the top tips if 70% of people from farming families have no will? What would be 3 things everybody needs to go home today and do?
Well, the first thing I would recommend anyone to do is get your bucket list and share it with your wife. And that doesn't mean go out and enjoy. The bucket list would include, do I have a will? Is it current? Is it up to date? What is the situation with my bank account? Do I have adequate life cover? All of those things will impact the family fairly quickly after the demise. And, you could go on. Do they know passwords? Do they know where the solicitor, the accountant is? Do I know where to be buried? Just take a list of 10 things. I know you said 3 things. Yes, prioritize the 3 things. When Olivia and I were out with someone, I asked someone, do you have a will? Well, no, not really. I explained to them the importance. When we came back the next time, they not only had their will, they had their enduring power of attorney. That means if they're incapacitated, someone who they have already agreed can take over their affairs without having to go through the courts. They sorted out their bank accounts and they ensure their adequate life cover. And just make sure a will cannot be written in stone. You can change it, and we'd recommend that you review it on an annual or even biannual basis. Your family are growing up, they're getting different aspirations. So when you made a will 20 years ago, it may not be the same situation or apply today. So yeah, get your will sorted out. It's just your family are going to be hit with grief at the loss of an individual, but it's the financial and practical one, as I said at the start, is going to be the second tsunami.
You see why you're a great double act. My goodness, 2 whammies there. Final point I want to mention just to Olivia. Veronica mentioned earlier that this service won't apply only to bereaved families, families who are given the diagnosis of a terminal illness. So I would be thinking, what a great way to be able to improve, if you like, the quality of those final weeks, months, whatever it might be, not to be frightened of the paperwork. How would you help Olivia if there's a diagnosis of terminal illness, if a family has to be informed and essentially nursed, guided through that last period?
It really is hand holding it, you know, and I think that's where myself and Sharon work very well together in that partnership. We sort of like, it is like a tag team. You know, Sharon comes in with her skill set and then I come in with my skill set, depending on what that person needs at that moment in time. So it is that sort of embrace without actually embracing in current moments and times, you know, to just let them know that they have a listening ear, that somebody's there, that's outside of all the emotional trauma and the overwhelmingness of things, and that we can come in at any time whenever they need.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you both very much indeed. See, it wasn't so bad.
Thank you.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, Sharon and Olivia, to support staff with rural support. So as Sharon and Olivia make their way back to their seats, we have three more guests who I know you'll be really interested to hear from. If I can invite Irene Dobbin, George Hazlitt and Brian Rowan to join me here on the stage. Brian Rowan, not the security correspondent from the BBC, but Brian is Norma's husband, who Brian sadly lost his father. We were just talking there a moment or two about the cases in that family. So come join me, Irene and Brian, and George is coming just there at the rear. Now, as I say, all three of our panellists here have been through trauma of various different kinds, and George has made the most remarkable recovery from a slurry incident. We'll come to George in just a moment or two until George gets comfortable, but let's talk through our stories just as we meet you. So first up, we've got Irene, and Irene, we were just talking there about diagnosis of a terminal illness and the fact that Life Beyond will cope with all manner of tragedies that affect families. And you sadly lost your husband a while ago now, but he was just 49 after a cancer diagnosis.
Yes, it was.
Tell me a little bit about hubby.
Robbie was diagnosed in October 1993 and died in April 94.
Yeah.
So at the beginning, I knew from the beginning that it was terminal. He didn't know at the start, not until near the end. So I had to cope with all that was going on outside. I came from a beef farm, so there was animals to see too, and lots of feeding to do and things like that.
Tell me about your family circumstance. You had young children too.
Yes, I had 3 children, one 20, one 15, and the boy was 12. Alistair was 12.
Yeah. That was a tough time, obviously, with the 12-year-old particularly at home.
Well, he was the one that I'd hoped would become the farmer. So
yeah.
However,
how did you cope then? Can you? I don't want to dwell too much, but going back to those early days.
Those early days when I needed help to feed and put in silage and all that, I had a brother-in-law quite near hand, and our good friend, your president today, Victor Chestnut, and his wife Carol were neighbours, were very helpful to me during that time.
Yeah. And what about managing the children at the time?
Well, children maybe don't take in just as much as I would have taken in of what was going on.
Yeah.
So they were just at school, Claire was at university, they just went on with their lives. Alistair did a lot of help at that time, you know, in the morning feeding and so on. He was able to do that.
Yeah.
But
so you were putting on a very brave face, clearly.
Well, I tried my best to be strong.
Yeah.
But to be strong for the children and also be strong for my husband.
Yeah. How did he cope in those last months? Were you able to have time to get everything in order?
Yes. Well, I knew that there was things in place. I knew there was a will in place, and I knew that the children had been provided for. I knew that because I would have been involved in the everyday running of the farm. So I knew all that, and I could have done bookwork and all. So I was able to cope with that.
Yeah.
But he was not until his final week. He knew that his time was short, and he remained very strong in his final
Yeah.
few days.
So what happened when he was gone then, Irene, and you had a farm functioning? Did you try to keep it running?
Well, that was April, and cattle would have been turning out quite soon after that, and they all went to grass, and some sold and remained in grass until the end of the season, and that's when they were all sold. And then the land was let in Conacre, and that's when everything went silent about the farmyard after
Which
that.
I think would have to be one of the most difficult things. But then you did an unusual thing, because you decided you were going to go into bed and breakfast.
Well, for a wee while, at the beginning when things were being sold and all that, but after that, there was a poultry unit on the farm, which is still there to this day, which I was involved in, and I was able to keep that going. But to me, that wasn't just enough for every day, like all the hours to keep going. I thought I would try bed and breakfast. So I started off in my own bungalow with bed and breakfast, and then a year later I added on an annex to that, and that's where I did bed and breakfast. And I must say that I found that very rewarding as a widow, because I met so many people, and I met so many other widows. They weren't all had been farmers, but they all had been through an experience, and that really helped me at that time.
They talk about the comfort of strangers. Would you
Yes.
say that was something?
Yes, very much so.
Yeah.
And to this day, lots of them keep in touch with me.
Isn't that wonderful?
Yes.
Says a lot about your hospitality too.
Well,
Do you do a good breakfast?
Well, I hope I did. I did.
And you know the eggs are fresh.
Yes.
What happened with the farm in the end? So we've now come forward 20 years. You talked about Alistair. You said that
Well,
you'd helped him out farm.
Alistair went to school, then went to Greenmount for 5 years, and then coming back home at that time, he would love to have started farming, but it just wasn't to be. It would have taken a lot of finance and so on to start up. He took a job with O'Kane Poultry, which is now Moy Park. He stayed there for 13 years. And 5 years ago, he always said he wanted to come back home. So 5 years ago, he decided to come back home.
Wow.
So he has set up now a broiler unit, and that's what he's involved in at the minute.
How pleased are you to see him home?
Oh, very much so.
Yeah.
He has taken all the responsibility of farming, anything to do with bookwork or tax or anything.
Well, you carried it for long enough.
Oh, yes. But I still get involved. I still help with the poultry.
I would know you would. Such a strong lady to come through all of that, and credit to you and your son as well. Let's bring in, shall we, Brian. Brian, we were talking a little bit outside, and you will be able to empathise very much with Irene and the loss of well, in Irene's case, her husband, but with your dad. Do you mind explaining to us what happened with your dad?
Yeah, as Norma outlined earlier, we had sideage to rake up, and he took the rake apart and got a blow to the head and went unconscious, and then we had to switch off life support.
Yeah.
So we had the funeral, and Dad was involved in the ploughing championships as well, and he represented Ireland 4 times in the world. So we had all those friends came from all over the country as well, and massive funeral, like all country funerals. But then as the days and weeks went by, you're going back doing the jobs that you had done previously with Dad.
Yeah.
And you'd be, if you were thinking of mowing grass, you'd be asking his opinion, should we do it or not? And we'd discuss it, and then we go do it, and it should either be right or wrong. And just found it very difficult, for my 2 sisters in Cork and Galway. Their lives hadn't changed because they hadn't seen Dad every day.
Yeah.
But finding things tough, and then we decided to do the memorial event.
Yeah.
And the original plan was to do the memorial event, honour the people that had died, and then park it there and do it again next year.
Yeah.
But we got emails at 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning from complete strangers giving us their life stories of, my partner was killed, I have 2 young children, bank accounts frozen, no will in place, and don't know what to do. And it was, in some cases, we were maybe their last hope kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And we just felt that we couldn't walk away and do no more for them. So I rang a few friends in the ag industry, and I said, look, we need to do something here. And got brilliant support. And I remember Pat Griffin, he's from the Health and Safety Authority. I rang Pat about a memorial event, and he said he'd ring me back. And He didn't ring me back when he said he did, but I rang him, and we've become great friends. And Pat sits on our board now, voluntary board as well.
Yeah.
So, what we've set up then is we do weekends away with the families that maybe have lost a dad or lost a child. And it's just like rural support, bringing families together, letting them talk to someone else going through the same thing.
Where do you find the time to do all this and run a big dairy farm at home?
Well, look, you make time an interest. For me, it's personal with Dad, and it's my way of honouring him, I suppose.
Yeah.
And then we meet so many good friends, and we have a lot of good friends up here in Northern Ireland as well. And we love coming up to the Balmoral show and meeting those people, because they come down to our service as well every June.
Yeah.
And we haven't met one family that we wouldn't like to just press the rewind button and take away their pain and their accident and stuff like that,
Yeah.
There's some remarkable families out there.
What about funding, Brian? Is it all through donations, or has government helped in any way?
No, we get no government funding. It's all donations. Again, I went begging to people in the ag industry for the first service. Remember, the hotel bill was 3,500 for tea and sandwiches, and we got sponsorship the first year. The second year, it was looking bad, and I went to Alex, the guy that owns the hotel, and I says, Alex, I don't have money for you, but say, give me a couple of weeks, and I'll sort something. And he says, go on. He says, you're grand. And that day, a widow who lost her husband 2 years previous, herself and her sisters and her family ran the women's mini marathon, and they presented me a check of 3,500 on the day, and it just fell into our hands, basically.
Yeah.
And that's what we did. And then Mocker Clubs and the Young Farmers Clubs of Ulster and all those people, they have been brilliant, doing small fundraisers up to massive fundraisers. And that's what keeps us going.
Yeah, but there's such an outpouring of support, it seems, from the community, and a need for what the services are that you're providing.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's just incredible. Let's bring in George, shall we? Sitting away far away from me, George. Really good to see you today. I had a bit of a chat with you before we began, and your story is quite phenomenal. Your recovery is exceptional. Explain for us what happened to you on the day that you became injured. It was a slurry accident.
I sold lamb. I went to the market that morning and sold lambs, but I came back and started making a slurry, and the slurry got the better. The gas overcome, and I collapsed.
Yeah. Your father rushed to your aid, and he collapsed as well, giving you mouth to mouth to try to bring you round.
Yeah.
How long were you in hospital for, George?
I was in hospital for 9 months. First 4 months was just getting back, to even sitting up in the bed, even feeding myself. A tremor in my body. I couldn't feed myself or clean myself, so it took the first 4 months to get back up, and then I went to the B&H unit in Musgrave, and they got me walking out of it with a walking aid, so very thankful for the health service.
Health Minister smiling in the front row, just a testimony to the work of NHS staff here. George, the prognosis at the beginning was very poor. You weren't expected to wake up.
Well, my wife, who's here today, she's actually a nurse, and I'm thankful that I'm married a nurse. But the doctors were telling her that if this man wakes up, he won't know you. They had MRI scanned me, and they said that the brain was basically dead or dying. So they kind of, they're amazed at how far I've come through there.
Yeah, 3 years ago, and earlier, for the record, Ashley, I did hear him say he didn't know what he would do without you. So he tells me he doesn't say it very often, but I think clearly it's a partnership that has got you this far, George. You, from being given a very, very poor prognosis, have had help from rural support in a very practical way, which has given you a huge amount of independence. Explain what happened.
Well, I was told I was going to get out of the hospital on the middle of March, and I know that how am I going to get around this farm? I hadn't got a quad bike, so I bought a quad bike. And on the hospital bed, I rang a boy up and to get the bike. And I remember I was out in the hospital a while. heard tell of rural sport, and I was wondering how they could help me. So I had this idea of quad bike gates. I could get round the farm independent, wouldn't have to get off the open gates, and thankfully they funded 6 gates for me, so I appreciate that.
So you've still got the sheep, you've still got the farm, and with this quad bike and this mechanised gate system that rural support helped you with, you have relative independence.
I have good. Well, I had to change the sheep enterprise, but whenever I was lying in bed in the hospital bed, decided the breeding sheep had to go. I kept me new lambs from that season, and so they were there whenever I got out of the hospital. And now what I do is just sell them as breeding hogs now, and buy in new lambs at this time of year. So it sort of gives me that purpose again and farming. I've got a turnover gate for turning my sheep up to do their feet, and you just change the way you do things and be happy that you're able to do them rather than just
You're
the
such
way
an
I was
example
working.
of tenacity and strength and determination, and rural support were there for you to help aid your recovery, which seems to be accelerating actually as time passes. What would be the thing you would take away from the experience, George? You don't sound like somebody who gets beaten or too down. I'm sure you've had your moments, but what would be the life lesson you've taken out of what happened to you?
Well, you just need the positivity, even people around you being positive, and being, that positivity that you're going to get better, and whenever you're down as far as where I was, there wasn't a lot of positivity about it one stage, but I still had the positivity that I'm going to get better, and and it's just good that for me to have back what I have now is really unbelievable, and you just appreciate life and more. Before there wasn't enough hours in the day, but now you just get the piece of that. They get the job done. So some says so.
Yeah, and you have a son at home, and he's helping.
I wouldn't be. He helps. He had to push him a bit to come, but he definitely is a big help. I'm thankful for he's 17 now too, so he's getting more and more useful. So yes.
Yeah, incredible story. It's been such a pleasure to meet you today, George, and to meet Brian and Irene. Ladies and gentlemen, 3 really inspirational characters. Please put your hands together. Thank you so much, Irene. Thank you so much. If you'd like to make your way back to your seats. So I think really we've a lot to take away with us today, haven't we? Having met 3 people who've been through so much and given back so much in their respective communities, and certainly with Embrace Farm, a really amazing legacy for Brian's father, which continues to this day. So as Irene and George and Brian make their way back to their seats, I'd like to invite our ministers who've been very patient today, and as I say, given up so much of their valuable time to be here. If Edwin Putz, Agriculture Minister, and Robin Swan, Health Minister, would like to come up and join us here today. I could also maybe mention at this stage, just as they make their way up, that as well as offering this practical support, the Life Beyond programme is also intending to host an annual event celebrating the lives and marking the contributions that farming men and women have made to the land and to their community, a little like what Brian has been talking about in the South. Bereavement, as we all know, is a natural experience that affects all of us, and this Life Beyond programme is about offering farming families empathy, to cope with grief, practical and emotional support to get them back on their feet, and of course that strength and resolve to move forward on a secure footing. So this year's inaugural event is to take place at the Glenavon Hotel. It's on the 24th of October. The details are in your pack that you received today. So I think that'll be a very moving and uplifting event for everyone involved. So enough from me, ladies and gentlemen. Shall we hear from our ministers? And Edwin Putz, perhaps, Agriculture Minister, if you'd like to take things off for us first. Ladies and gentlemen, Edwin Putz.
Thank you very much, Karen. It's good to see you again, and it's great to be able to join with you. And thank you, Victor, for the invitation to come and assist in the launch of this event. And it's been a very inspiring event thus far, a really encouraging event. And if you needed any arguments as to why this service is needed, I think that we've heard it already today. And, you know, the stories that we've heard could be multiplied and replicated so many times. I know that even in our own family, going back 1993, my father took a very heavy stroke in his early 60s and was wiped out like that there just to in his normal activities. Spent 16 weeks in hospital, and 2 years later we lost our mother. And that was just such a difficult and hard time. And I remember even, you know, my mother's funeral, it was a huge event, like Mr. Rowan's. And, you know, we're all so busy at the time, and people were calling, and, you know, the wake was just a constant flow of people. And thereafter, there was people calling, and you had affairs to sort out. But about 6 or 8 weeks passed, and all of that was done, and the people stopped calling, and they stopped asking. And that empty chair was there, and all of that support and mentoring that, you know, I received from a mother who was very special to me was gone. And we had to deal with providing support from my father and all of that. And it's just so many families are going through so much, and, you know, the rest of us are getting on with their lives and we don't know, and we don't have time. So actually creating a support service for people in this situation, you know, I'm just delighted that it's happening. It's needed so much, and it's demonstrated today just from the families of what they have went through. And, you know, we are a very independent and resilient and tough people, but there's many a time that we could do with a wee hand, with an encouraging word, and just even knowing that we've somebody there to fall back on. We mightn't even use it, but just knowing that they're there to fall back on. So I'm delighted to co-launch this with Robin today, and give every encouragement to the President of the Ulster Farmers Union and all of those around him who have created this project, and wish you well with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. And we're also delighted to have with us today the Health Minister, Robin Swan.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you, Mr. President, for the invite. I'm delighted to be here to join you today to help launch the Life Beyond programme along with Edwin. But I think, taking Edwin's personal account and what we've heard from Irene, George and Brian, it shows the need for this service. But it also shows, I think it was talked about, the resolve and the positive nature of the three speakers that we heard. There's so many other families that don't have the strength or the ability to come forward. And that's why it is hugely welcome that this initiative has taken place. And I want to pay tribute to everyone behind it. As a former board member of Rural Support, I'm also very pleased to see that that organisation is thriving and constantly pushing itself to take on even more responsibilities and deliver more services. And so I have every confidence that they, working closely with Embrace Farm, will take this programme on with the skill and the sensitivity that it will undoubtedly require. Because as Edmund has said, no family escapes the heartache. When my brother-in-law passed away at 36 with 2 young children and milking a herd of 140 cows. There was the challenge that came to our family circle too, as well as what support was there at that point in time. So I do welcome the fact that our farm families will now have a source of dedicated and tailored support, whatever the circumstances may be. And a programme such as Life Beyond, with the breadth of services it will include, is hugely welcome. But as Health Minister as well, I also especially welcome, and Veronica mentioned it earlier on, the fact that the support will be also made available to families and individuals that have been given a terminal diagnosis. Because farming people, as has been mentioned, are a proud people, but really they still experience the same fears and the same anxieties as everyone else, only often we're much better at hiding it. So coming to terms with the loss or devastating news is difficult for anyone, but especially for our farmers and their families, as that relentless cycle and demands of agriculture can often make it difficult for many people to find the time to grieve. And as it is grief that is already hard enough, there are farmyards right across Northern Ireland where also injuries have been sustained and lives have been lost in often tragic circumstances. So can I just thank all those involved in launching Embrace Farm, and hope you have a challenge. Well, I don't hope you have a challenging time ahead. I know you have a challenging time ahead, but I hope you have the support that you really deserve, and can I congratulate those behind this initiative and bringing it to support our families here in Northern Ireland. So thank you.
Thank you both. Minister Swan and Minister Poots there, thank you both very, very much indeed for your contribution, just underpinning the support available to farming families going through difficult times. Now, we're almost wrapping up. If we could please welcome back very briefly the Ulster Farmers Union President Victor Chestnut and the Managing Director of ABP Food Group Northern Ireland, George Mullen. You're very welcome to the stage.
You know, as I stand here, it nearly brings a lump to my throat. When an idea and a vision starts to take shape, it really makes you feel that you have achieved something. Thanks to the ministers for launching this. Thanks to the panel, and especially to Irene, to Brian, and to George. I would like you to give them a standing ovation and another clap. George, you said you were speaking to me the last time at a sheep sale where I was selling ewe lambs. I just want to let you know of ewe lambs for sale another fortnight in Ballymena. Brian and Norma, it was really through the service that you ran that I went down to that I felt the real need for something akin to that, what you were providing in the south to widen into the north. Thank you for your help, and for your help setting this up, and your continued help will be much appreciated. Irene, thanks for coming today. I'm going to go off script a little bit. Irene's husband Robbie was the closest thing I had to the brother. He was the type of neighbour that landed into the yard in the morning and said, "Victor, have you any cattle to dose?" And I said, I have a field or two to dose. Well, I have a field or two to dose. Whose will we do first? And we would have went together. We might have dosed his. And if I was at his, I would have ate in Irene's house. And I can testament that would have been a good enough breakfast, I can tell you. Or we might have dosed ours. Robbie was a fit man. Before he got his diagnosis, I remember chasing after stored cattle in a field, and he beat me running across the field. And he was about maybe 10 years older than me. I never really worked it out, but I wasn't that pleased to be beat running, for I thought I was brave and fit. But Robbie was longer of the leg, and he beat me across the field. But you know, one of the best conversations I had with anybody on this earth was 2 days before Robbie died, sitting at his bedside when Robbie could only speak in a whisper. And Robbie said that he was ready to go, and he had no fears of where he was going. He didn't like leaving the family so young. And you know, if this service can come and help people at the point of their need, then I feel proud that we've achieved something today. We also need to thank those who have initially helped fund the programme, those that were mentioned earlier. I want to especially thank George Mullen, and I'm going to ask George to come forward, and indeed Liam McCarthy. Liam has always a passion for stopping farm accidents and for helping people in need. And I want to really thank them for their generous donation. It took all the pressure off wondering where the money was going to come from at the start to set this up. And it has really given this initiative the start it deserves. I'll just introduce George as chair of our Life Beyond steering group and managing director of ABP Food Group to come to the stage. You know, we thought when George was good enough for Larry Goodman, he'd be good enough for us. George.
Thank you very much, Victor. Ministers, ladies and gentlemen, listening as we did to the harrowing accounts from our guests this afternoon will surely leave us in no doubt of the necessity of an initiative such as Victor has put forward today, Life Beyond. Just want to mention a few take-home messages. Firstly, from what we heard today, should we now try to become better aware of and understand the current situation in the farming community? It has been reinforced to those of us who have worked within the farming community for many years just how fortunate and indeed privileged we are in dealing with such a unique group of hospital and caring people. As we know from experience just how they cherish their independence. They are proud people, they are resilient people, and they have a dedication and commitment to their farms and their families. And these attributions, they often pass down from generation to generation. And surely such people are deserving of our practical and moral support in the face of not only the current pandemic, but also unprecedented challenges coming down the line from their businesses and lifestyles. As the age profile of our farmers increase, concerns over succession, dealing with isolation of everyday routine, and a multitude of challenges ahead all take their toll on both physical and mental health in the countryside. The immediate consequences of a poor work-life balance can often result in slower reactions and an inability to take full account of the risk. Combine this with a common reluctance to be seen to bother others or seek help, and you are left with a distinct possibility of a possible fatality or a life-changing injury. As we've heard, the urgency and the magnitude of the consequences of those left to pick up the pieces, and even their ability to do so, for most of us, are beyond comprehension. Secondly, how might we best equip ourselves to recognise and deal with a possible circumstance which we feel is not just right on a farm? It may be as a friend, a neighbour, a family member who perhaps thinks things are going in the wrong direction and which could so easily become a serious issue on a farm. There are many people visit farms, from suppliers to livestock buyers to the different services that are supplied. And these people should, possibly train themselves to look and watch and see what they can around the farm, and maybe, give an extra 5 minutes in the farmyard to talk to the farmers, and, you never know what you might hear. And can we simply become better in the most delicate manner at making farming folk aware of the confidential services of the rural support, Embrace Farm, Life Beyond, and the health and well-being services? This may be a one-off opportunity to make a change and shouldn't be missed. Finally, can I thank everyone in rural support and Embrace Farm, and indeed the recently formed board of Life Beyond, for their hard work in making this launch happen in the current circumstances. I would especially like to acknowledge the work of the President of the UFU. It was Victor who, in selecting his official charity for his time in office, was brave to set up a new charity, Life Beyond. I'd like to thank Karen for her work today. She conducts the orchestra in a very calming way for everyone that came to the stage. She's a farmer at heart, and a lot of what's gone on today resonates with her. And finally, allow me to especially thank all those who have been so deeply affected by the tragedies. For Brian and George and Ellen for the for sharing their details with us and the recollections of their harrowing events. You have done so in a most courageous way, and thank you again. Veronica has mentioned to me to thank a few of the sponsors: the Ulster Farmers Union, the NFU Mutual Charitable Trust, the Northern Ireland Grain Traders Association, the Richard Laws Foundation, and the Tyrone Farming Society for their monetary contributions to the charity so far. And can I assure you that myself and my colleagues in ABP, and especially Liam McCarthy, will remain totally committed to the health and well-being of the farming community through regular communications with our livestock producers and our membership of the Northern Ireland Farm Safety Partnership and our ongoing support of the Air Ambulance. And of course, delighted to be involved in Life Beyond. Thank you.
George, for your support and guidance as chair of the steering committee, and thank you too for all those who gave up their time on the steering committee and gave of their expertise to help drive this Life Beyond forward. I would also like to thank all those at Embrace Farm and indeed Rural Support for the work they are doing to support our families throughout Life Beyond. It's not easy work, but it's necessary work to help strengthen our families, and this is to be commended. Today has been the result of many people, organisations and supporters coming together, and I'm just going to mention a few of them. Firstly, I would like to thank Alan Crowe and his team here at RUAS for their support and the use of this magnificent building and for the refreshments we're about to enjoy. Thank you and all the best for a successful show at the end of this next month. Sincere thanks also to Gareth Galt, commonly known as Donkey, and Grassman for the use of this lorry for the stage today, and indeed for the support in getting the word out about this vital programme. Thanks for your attendance, Ruth, here today. And by the way, Donkey's a nephew of Irene here, a nephew of Irene here that was up with us. Thank you too to all our funders and our donors. Without your financial support, Life Beyond would not have got to this stage and be ready to support more families over the coming months and year. My own organisation, the UFU, and as George said, the President picks a charity. Thank you to the staff for putting up with an awkward sort of a president when he didn't pick one of the many charities out there, but gave them the task of setting up a new one. Thank you to Derek for your early days in setting up those meetings, and indeed for Heather Stewart, who helps our events, and for Lindsay. I also want to make mention of our Rural Affairs Committee and for their support. They got behind this and supported this, especially through their Women in Agriculture Conference, and that committee is chaired by Jennifer Hawkes. I also want to thank my two deputies here today for their support putting this up, both David Brown and William Irvine. But special thanks to each of you for attending today and for your attention. I would especially want to thank those of the press that came along and will pick this up. I want to finish with a call to action. We want you all here to spread the word, to tell people about Life Beyond. Life Beyond should be the norm for people when they have that bereavement or that terminal diagnosis, not when the buffers hit. So I would like this to become the norm for farming families in Northern Ireland, that this support's here, people know it. And I would just remind you can access the services if you need them yourself or know anyone who needs support. If you'd like to donate to the programme, there's information in your pack. And indeed, on the UFU stand and the rural support stand in Balmoral in a week or two, there will be opportunity for giving. But I would also be very pleased to welcome you to the celebration gathering in the Glenevan Hotel, the first of what I hope will be many on the 24th of October, where we will mark the contribution made to the farming community of all our loved ones who have passed away. Finally, and you'll be glad to hear that it's finally from me because I'm standing between you and the cup of tea at the back. Finally, I would like to thank Karen Patterson for comparing here today. As a farmer yourself, Karen, you understand the challenges faced by the farming community, and we are very grateful for your support here today. Right, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And just to reiterate, it really is my pleasure to be here today. And I have such faith in what everyone involved is trying to achieve. So I think it's a wonderful, wonderful initiative. It really does go without saying. Anyway, just to draw proceedings to a close then, I'm delighted to say that we have Victoria Ross. Victoria was a young farmer, and she's with us today with a closing poem, I believe. Do I see Victoria anywhere? Here she comes. Okay. So Victoria's making her way up to the stage, and I'll hand the microphone to Victoria to wrap proceedings up. Thank you.
Hiya folks, I just want to draw today's proceedings to a close, but I also want to thank you for coming here today to support our Life Beyond programme. I think it'll be an absolutely amazing programme spread out to our families right across Northern Ireland. So I want to finish today with a reflection, and it's a poem called Hope, and I hope you enjoy it. If you can only carry one thing throughout your entire life, let it be hope. Let it be hope that better things are always ahead. Let it be hope that you can get through even the toughest of times. Let it be hope that you are stronger than any challenge that comes your way. Let it be hope that you are exactly where you are meant to be right now, and that you are on the path to where you are meant to be. Because during these times, hope will be the very thing that carries you through. Thank you.
Victoria, thank you very much indeed. And that really does wrap everything up for us today. There are refreshments for you at the bottom of the room, well-deserved, parched, hot, warm, sunny day today. So have a moment or two, chat with one another, and take away a few messages to spread the word on our launch today of Life Beyond. Thank you for coming today, and I'll hope to see you soon.